every single Tuesday. We get an audience with the King himself. Peter King joins us here on 95.7 The Game. Peter, thank you very, very much. The entire world got to watch the 49ers just sort of wreck the Rams last night. They really, really put it on them, held them to essentially 9 points, and it could have even been 6 had Gibson not dropped a breadbasket interception in the end zone. What was your biggest takeaway from Monday Night Football concerning the Niners last night?
Well, the biggest takeaway was clearly that if they stay relatively healthy on defense, they will be playing deep into January, because you don't need to be a great offensive team when your defense can do what this defense does. Now, we need to preface all of the praise for the defense, on one pretty important thing. Mount Whitworth is gone from the Rams offensive line, and now you can see why he was one of their 5 most valuable players over the last, over the whole time that Sean McVay has been there. You plug him in at left tackle and forget it. But, the Rams have some massive issues, like massive. I don't think this is just something you can say, well, it's only one night. They've got issues on the offensive line. They've got issues with Allen Robinson. They got issues with any receiver who's not named Cooper Kupp. And, they're good enough on defense, no question about it. But if they're going to be non-competitive because of that offensive line on offense, it's going to be a hard year for them. But the 49ers, to me, when I look at them, they also had an awful lot of absolutely no-name guys you've never heard of on the offensive line, playing a lot of football last night. And, Jimmy Garoppolo in his sack category, 0 for 0 yards. And that doesn't mean it was perfect, because it wasn't. But I think that the 49ers figured out a formula in this game of how to win. Run it good enough, and I'm sure Kyle Shanahan will say we can run it better, but run it good enough behind a kind of a shaky offensive line, but definitely good enough last night. And then put it in the hands of Jimmy Garoppolo. And, he's not going to be Dan Marino, but he's going to be efficient enough, and he's going to be able to find Deebo Samuel enough, to make to play a very good game.
It sounds like you've sort of decided that the 49ers ought to be pretty good, all conditions remaining relatively the same, and the Rams are going to struggle, all conditions remaining relatively the same. Are there any other teams in the NFC for which you can say that, or is this going to be the kind of conference where anybody who can win 11 games owns the conference outright?
Ray, you know what happens? On October 4th, you can make a lot of grandiose statements, and on January 4th, you look back and laugh at them. So all I can go by is basically what we saw last night and what we've seen in the first 4 weeks. Right now, it's almost been a feudal division. There's one division where everybody's 2-2, and that's the NFC West. And, San Francisco right now has a gigantic advantage because they're the only one of those 4 teams that's 2-0 in the division. So you look at it and you basically say, okay, they're 2-4 or 2-2 in the division. They've won both. They're better than anybody in the division in net points. So I like where the 49ers are right now. But again, what happens, and we've seen it a lot, so far in the first quarter of the season, Nick Bosa is the defensive player of the year. But, Nick Bosa also has to last 17 games. He's lasted 4. And I'm not saying there's an injury wish. I don't mean anything like that. But in the NFL, you see it every single week. The New York Giants are 3-1 somehow, some way, and they got 94 people injured right now. I don't know who is going to play against the Packers Sunday in London, and I don't know that they're going to look anything like a 3-1 team. They may be down to a quarterback who's not even on the roster yet. We don't even know. But anyway, the whole point I'm making is that if everybody stays healthy, everybody stays the same for the next 3 months, which of course is not going to happen for the next 3 days. But if everything stays the same, the 49ers are going to play deep into this season. But again, it's a battle of attrition, and so much of this is going to depend on the depth that John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan and Adam Peters have built with this roster.
And they're about to get Jason Verrett and Jimmy Ward back, so that could make this already pretty nasty defensive unit even nastier. And the way that this kind of all goes, Peter, it looks like Kyle, who has not been a head coach long enough to have a robust coaching tree, it looks like he's going to have a fourth branch soon enough. I mean, McDaniel's a head coach, Sal is a head coach, LaFleur is a head coach, and DeMeco Ryans has to be next in line based on the results his side of the football is getting, doesn't he?
I would think he's going to have a really good chance. The whole issue with DeMeco Ryans is we just had a year, I think I'm right in saying this, where there were 7 new head coaches in the NFL, and only one came from the defensive side of the ball, Matt Eberflus. So, we'll see. I mean, I'm wrong on that because obviously Todd Bowles was there too, so it's 2. But you're right. He absolutely deserves a shot based on what he has built there and based on the fact that it's an offensive head coach who has had a gigantic job to do because the offense needs so much help, or has needed so much help in his 6 seasons here. So I really hope DeMeco Ryans gets a shot, and I think he definitely deserves one, and we'll see how many openings there are and who wants to take a shot on a defensive guy. I mean, a lot of that, honestly, guys, comes down to when DeMeco Ryans walks into the room, they say, okay, who's your offensive coordinator? And I don't know who that would be, but there are so many good young coaches in the NFL right now on the offensive side of the ball that I think that shouldn't be a major stumbling block if they like the leadership and if they like what DeMeco Ryans will bring to the table.
There's no doubt it's an offensive league. But in such an offensive league, maybe a defensive coach can help you navigate through it. I mean, we all know that this goes in cycles. Peter, Talanoa Hufanga is leaving everyone's jaws on the floor, right? I mean, you go ahead. Just tell me what you think, what you've heard about this guy.
What I'm saying is, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, first of all, I didn't have any idea who this guy was, like this summer, and I started hearing about him a little bit. Oh, okay, fine. Works out with Troy Polamalu. Troy has been so influential in his life and all that. And I think it's really what I think is important to look at and important to realize about young players, particularly in a defense like this one. And again, this is going to sound a little odd, but I think it is so important, even when your defense is really good, okay? Even when your defense is really good, it's so important to get new talent throughout the entire draft. Dre Greenlaw, who you were just talking about before, he is a former 5th-round pick. And obviously, Hufanga is also a 5th-round pick from 2021. And so you've got to reinvigorate your roster throughout every round of the draft. And if you go back to their first draft when they got George Kittle in the 5th round, that sort of puts a little salve on the fact that they picked Solomon Thomas and Reuben Foster in the 1st round that year. So if you're good throughout the draft, able to put deodorant on picks like Solomon Thomas and Reuben Foster, and I think that's what this team has done. They have picked pretty well consistently on the 3rd day of the draft, and it holds them in good stead right now with players like Hufanga, who clearly is going to be a major factor in that secondary for the rest of this year. The way he plays, this is one hungry dude.
The game last night was supposed to be kind of a referendum on how good the 49er defense was in general, because their first 3 games are against teams that don't generate much offense. Now they have games against Carolina and Atlanta, which are sort of meh, and then they host Kansas City in Week 7. Is that the great litmus test for whether this is an elite defense or a generational defense?
Ray, honestly, you know what I think? I think the great test for this defense is coming out of this. Doesn't it seem like the 49ers every year have a 2-game Eastern time zone trip? And I'd like to look that up. I should look it up. But I think there's a couple of years where they started the season twice in Eastern time and then, went back to the West Coast.
They used to go to Youngstown and set up shop, and then they were like, wait a minute, the Greenbrier's a 5-star hotel. Let's go there.
Exactly. Well, the Greenbrier, that was the year, remember the Greenbrier, which was 2 years ago or 3 years ago, when they got absolutely mauled in the first game of the season. I mean, they won the game, but they got so beat up against the Jets that it ended up hurting them for a lot of that season, obviously. But the thing I would say about your question, I would say that real litmus test for this team and this defense is to take care of business in 2 games that everybody thinks that you should win. There are so few games in the NFL that end up being gimme. They just don't exist very much anymore. Everybody is so close. And so as much as you might say, I mean, we could sit here and say, oh, they are so much better than Carolina, and they are probably significantly better as well. They're significantly better than Atlanta. But I would just say one thing, kind of be careful about what you wish for here. I mean, the Carolina Panthers, so far this year have played excellent in the defensive secondary. They've got a very aggressive, good coordinator in Phil Snow. They've played well enough on defense to be 3-1, and yet they're 1-3. So anyway, I think the thing I would say is forget about the Chiefs game in 3 weeks. I know the fans will think that's a big game, sexy, and all that stuff. The 49ers got to take care of business and win these 2 games and get to 4-2 so that they have the ability then to not make too much of this, of this game against Kansas City. And, in the NFL, you got to win the games you got to win. And these next 2 games, regardless of the venue, they got to win these 2 games.
And this offense has to generate a little bit more than what was obviously an acceptable level of offense last night. You're just asking your defense for too much. And we just saw the Chiefs go through one of the best defenses in football in Tampa Bay like they were butter. So, yeah, that is going to be a huge game coming up after this 2-game road trip. Peter King with us here on 95.7 The Game. Looking around the NFL to ask you questions around the league, Peter, it feels impossible to look past the conversations of concussions that have come up based on what happened to Tua in Cincinnati. As you're looking at the outrage die down and the actual response from the NFL, people want a response from the NFL. Do you think we're going to get a better, safer, healthier league looking at concussions, or is this lip service to the moment and this moment will pass?
If it is, the NFL is making a gigantic mistake. Gigantic. The other day I asked for responses. I went on Twitter and I said, hey, I'd love to hear your direct responses to what you've seen with Tua Tagovailoa over the last few days. And particularly, I'd like to hear from parents of kids in youth football or high school football. And I got, 80 some odd responses. And the most interesting one was from a guy in Andover, Massachusetts, who has a 9-year-old son. And this is a guy, he told me, played 4 years of high school football, 4 years of college football. It has played a big role in making him the person he is. And he wants his 9-year-old son one day to play football. So he watches football with his wife, and he's watching the game on Thursday night after watching the previous weekend. And, his wife's a fan, and after the Tua thing happens and he's laying on the ground and he's got to get stretchered off, his wife turns to him and said, and that is why Charlie is not playing football. And, as he said in his letter to me, I had no comeback. What could I say? And, we can talk about the immediacy of this story and the importance of this story, and of course it's important. And, it's hugely important to the people who play this game. But it's also important to the NFL in 2040 and in 2035, because you better have a pool other than high school football players in Florida and California and Georgia and Louisiana, okay? And, where everybody loves football and they don't care how dangerous it is. It's such a tradition there that people are going to keep playing. You got to care about the places that like football right now, and you don't want to lose them either as fans or as a potential pipeline. So I think that is something the NFL is considering very strongly. And about what will happen with this, Mike Florio said on Football Night in America on Sunday, and I think he's absolutely right. I've talked to Alan Sills, the NFL's medical director, about it, and I think Mike hit the nail on the head in that they are very likely in the NFL to eliminate players from playing once they have demonstrated gross motor instability. That is the big phrase in the concussion protocol. And if you remember, 9 days ago, when Tua Tagovailoa is playing against the Buffalo Bills, and he gets knocked to the turf by Matt Milano, the Buffalo linebacker, and when he gets up, he's woozy and has to go down to one knee because he can't walk. He's just woozy. He's like a punch-drunk fighter. And they took him in at halftime, and he convinced them somehow, some way, that it was his back. The two medical officials with him told the Dolphins that he was okay to play. But the only thing I'm saying is right now, Florio reports that is going to mean once you've demonstrated gross motor instability, for whatever reason, your day is done. It's all over. Can't play anymore. That is a very big step in the right direction. And I think the other step that they need to take, that they're thinking about taking, is really ratcheting up the difficulty of return to play on the concussion protocol. So in other words, yeah, you'll be out that week if you demonstrate gross motor instability. But there's going to be significant, well, I shouldn't say there will be. They're discussing a more stringent back to football thing that a player must pass before he's able to play again. So I think both of those are steps in the right direction.
Conspiracy lunatic that I am, is there any talk in conjunction with these about punishment for a defensive player, or a player who causes that injury? Because it seems to me that the loophole that your standard defensive coach would suggest is, look, even if you've got to get kicked out of the game, if you could take their quarterback out, we're good with that. Is there any indication that they want to twin this with a more punitive view of people who deliver blows?
Not that I've heard of, Ray, but I think what's going on right now is that the NFL is trying to make a deal with the NFLPA about, what exactly to do about the whole return to play and about concussions. Now, the rules, they don't have to discuss with the NFLPA. So, I mean, I haven't heard this. It wouldn't shock me, but I'm not sure that what Matt Milano did, which wasn't flagged on the field because, in essence, he just pushed Tua Tagovailoa down a split second after he got rid of the ball. I don't know how you then say to Matt Milano, if let's just say that play was found to have made, given Tua a concussion, which according to the doctors, then it wasn't. But if it was, I don't know how, if a guy doesn't get penalized on the field, you then say you're suspended for a week for that hit, which by NFL rule wasn't illegal. And if he didn't get a head injury on it, nobody would be saying anything about it.
The other thing that I would wonder is whether this is the kind of issue where labor and management can put aside their decades of animosity and actually work together in a sort of non-confrontational way to not just address the problem, but actively make it better. Because a couple of flaws in the system as it's been is they allow teams to sort of either hire the inspecting doctor or have a sort of influence over him. And the second thing is listening to players who say they're okay. Is there any indication that can happen to the point where they stop asking players how they're doing and just say, look, you hit your head. We don't care if you're doing great right now. You're done for the night, because that's what safety is. We're not asking you how you feel about it.
Well, I guess I'd say two things to that, Ray. Number one, the unaffiliated neurotrauma consultants. When this first was put into play, and these are neurologists, very high profile in many cases, traumatic brain surgeons, people who've studied the human brain a lot. A lot of these people are at the very high level of the medical field as it relates to study and treatment of the brain. And over the last week or so, I think one of the things that I have heard that is a little bit disturbing to me is that these guys, let's say the chairman of the neurology department at Harvard is the guy on the Patriots sideline. And if, the Patriots quarterback goes down and is woozy and everything, it boggles my mind to think that people would jump to the conclusion that the guy who is the unaffiliated neurotrauma consultant working the Patriots game, who works at the highest level of the brain as it relates to brain health in the United States, would then go, and even if the Patriots quarterback was a little bit woozy, if he would say, this guy's okay to go back in. I mean, saying that doesn't happen or couldn't happen or anything, but to assume that it does happen, I just have a big problem with that.
What if I told you, Peter, that the guy who cleared Tua had him as his fantasy quarterback? No, I'm just kidding. Obviously, you're right. That is not part of any respectable level of medicine.
The only thing I'm saying, guys, is that there has been a lot of jumping to conclusions over the last 9 days by people who have absolutely no idea how this system works, how the hiring of these guys work. And look, there's a decent chance that they made a mistake after the Tua was allowed to go back in against Buffalo. It sure looks like it to me, and it looks like it to most people. However, I can't jump to the conclusion that they absolutely made a mistake, and I certainly wouldn't jump to the conclusion that the whole system, is flawed and corrupt.
Peter, I want to wrap up with this, because when you're not sitting at a Monday Night Football game, when you're not in the press box, I assume you're sitting on your couch in your lazy boy, wherever you're most comfortable in your house, and you're watching the game and taking notes and thinking about what from that game might be in your column. You're never not working a game, even if you're not in the press box working the game. I'm sure of that. Do you ever flip over to the Manning cast? Do you flip back and forth between Joe Buck and Peyton Manning?
I watched a lot of it last night, and it was, look, I went to the Eagles-Jaguars game on Sunday. I don't go to a lot of games. I might go to 4 or 5 regular season games a year, and then I go to a game every week in the playoffs. But I don't go to a lot of games anymore. But I went to the Eagles, and I spent 10 minutes after the game with Jalen Hurts, and I was overwhelmingly impressed with who he is, a lot of the things I learned about him while I was there. And I thought it was sad that, he had most of the second quarter or whatever, and like everyone was a 3 and out. Every time that Eli or Peyton had an interesting thing to talk to him about, they had to go to a commercial. So you didn't really get to see the kind of intelligent, insightful Jalen Hurts who I think really exists. But yeah, I'm really interested in the Manning cast. I think it's fascinating. And the way I do it is, like, if John Hamm comes on, I'm going to watch Joe Buck and Troy Aikman.
Right.
And I like it, just Eli watching the game and talking to each other. That is about my favorite time. I have no interest in watching The Rock, watching Hollywood stars. I'm sure everybody in California loved it. I have no interest in watching Steph Curry, talk about the game. I mean, Steph Curry's a great guy, evidently. Right. But
what do you think's coming on second down, Steph? I don't know.
Exactly. But I think, look, and this was in 2012, so it was 10 years ago. I had a long interview with a guy, because my contract was expiring at SI, Sports Illustrated. And I had a long interview with John Walsh, who is really the brains of almost everything, at the baseline of what ESPN has become. He's a brilliant programmer, just a brilliant person, I thought. And so we were in a hotel having lunch in Washington, and I don't know, we spent about 3 hours together, and we talked about a lot of things. And I asked him about all the different things that he did at ESPN. And one of the things he told me that day is, he said, listen, in order to really be good at almost anything, you've got to take chances. So we might put 10 new shows on every year. And if one of them works, you throw 10 things against the wall, one of them sticks, and you're happy. He goes, that's how we found Pardon the Interruption. Who in the world thought that Tony Kornheiser and Mike Wilbon would ever be great together on TV? Nobody. But we said, let's give it a shot, and look what happened. And so I think one of the things, this is a product of what John Walshization of ESPN was, which is, let's just try a bunch of cool stuff. And I think that the Manning cast is a really, really good idea. I probably spend a third to a half of my time every Monday watching them, and then the other time watching Buck and Aikman.
Yeah, we watch the same way. I cut away from entertainment interviews, and I come on back for the brothers actually talking to themselves. Peter, thank you for talking to us. By the way, while we were talking, I know you're a big baseball fan. Aaron Judge hit his 62nd home run in Texas while we were talking.
Good. I'm a good dude. I'm a very anti-Yankees person, but I really appreciate class and the greatness of Aaron Judge. I'm happy for him. And, hey, I'll just ask you one question. Any chance he's leading off for the Giants next spring?
I mean, he better be hitting cleanup, for goodness sakes, if they do sign. The
I bet him sixth.
Pile of money. Who's got the biggest pile of money? Very few Yankees, by the way, walk away from historic pinstripes. I have noticed that in my life. So we'll see.
You're right about that. He is a proud Californian.
He is. Just throwing it.
Never know.
Peter King breaking the news. It could happen.
Say one last thing.
Yeah.
So, last day for one other proud Californian who had some great years with the Oakland A's. It's the last day in baseball for Dennis Eckersley. He is retiring after 50 years in baseball. The last few years he's done the Red Sox games on TV for Nesson in New England. And I was watching a little bit of him today, and he broke down on TV. He was so emotional, but said that the reason that he really wanted to go away is his two twin grandchildren in the Bay Area, and he just wants to be around them every day. And just really, really cool. Here's a guy, MVP, Cy Young winner, threw a no-hitter, had 390 saves in his life, first ballot Hall of Famer. It's kind of cool. So he'll be coming back to the Bay to live out his golden years.
Thank you so much, Peter. Always great to talk with you. We dabbled in a little TV and baseball today. I love it. Thank you so much.
All the best, guys.
Peter King, you're on 95.7 The Game.